Maybe this is the most important breakthrough pathways lesson that we've got today, because we're going to talk about the resurrection of Jesus and its significance in our world. But just a couple of preambles. We're doing through the training of the 12. If you've tuned in late here, go back, and this is number 48. We go all the way back to lesson 1. We got, I don't know, half a dozen lessons to go. But I want to share with you something that is of concern to me. We put a lot of emphasis in our culture on what we call the Christmas season, and Frosty the Snowman is as real as Jesus in the minds of the people and the culture. And we have some fun with, a red-nosed reindeer and some other things, and those are nice fantasies, but the reality behind it is that the Word became flesh. That's the beginning. Now, when we get to the resurrection, we come towards the end of Jesus' ministry, and there's no fantasy involved here. We're going to deal with that. But most people in our society do not really understand it. Most of us live in our own silo, in our own belief system, with our own friends, and we do not understand that even those who are maybe of another branch of Christendom don't grasp all the things that we grasp. So we need to know what the people around us are thinking and what they're believing, and understanding their skepticism. Skepticism is growing rapidly amongst the younger generation because we see so many things that don't align with reality. And I'm going to finish with that today, but I want to start with this story. I live in Brampton, Ontario, along with my wife, and we love it here. But some of you will not understand this, that in Canada, 2% of the population is sick. They're not Sikh, they're sick. That doesn't mean they're ill, they're sick. That's how they pronounce the term. So as soon as you say Sikh, it's a tell that you don't really know who they are. So the sick people in Brampton, in Canada, about 2%. But in Brampton, where we live, a city approaching 500,000 people, 25% of them are of Sikh heritage. Most of those from the Punjab region of India. And I'm so pleased that we have a part of that. I love my Sikh friends. They tend to be those who live by their faith. They tend to be people of high moral character and integrity. They're monotheists, and they have a lot of similarities to Christianity, but most of them don't actually know much about their own faith. I've tested a few of them from time to time and asked them to tell me about it. First of all, do you know when Sikhism started? Do you know how many gurus there are? Because they were the revelators, according to the Sikh religion, really coming out of Hinduism. Do you know how many gods there are in Sikhism? No, there's only one God. And these 10 gurus, answer to the question, are the revealers. And then at the end, the last guru declared, of the 10th, declared before he died, that their scriptures would be the final guru. Now, it comes at a parallel time to our Christmas season in the week of December that overlaps the 25th. They celebrate or honor, I guess respect is less than celebrate, remember the martyrdom of that final Sikh. Him and his 4 sons and his mother were all assassinated, and they have a week of remembrance day by day, much like we would have the Stations of the Cross and so on. And they remember this martyrdom. We're very, very different as Christians, because while Jesus died on the cross, that's the beginning. It's not the ending. And it's the resurrection story that we need to reiterate over and over again. In the passages of Scripture that speak of the resurrection, all 4 Gospels tell us that there's a deep skepticism. This isn't wishful thinking. This isn't fanciful. And we need to understand something of the resurrection and the doubt that people had. So these passages, these little indicators that are on the screen before you, tell you that the disciples weren't in on this at all. Now, even though there was prophecy would talk about him seeing life and from Isaiah and onward. And Jesus said, he told them some things about the future that they just hadn't assimilated into their understanding. And as far as they were concerned, the cross ended it all. Now, this is very important that on the street, naive people think, well, it was fanciful thinking, it's a myth, etc., etc. According to the only records that we have, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the disciples fell into this despair after Jesus died. All hope was gone. And when they heard that Jesus was risen from the dead, they didn't believe. They said, no, you got to be kidding. That's fake news. And they had nothing but skepticism. And that's so important for us to understand. This wasn't wishful thinking that they wished Jesus would come back. All four of the Gospels tell us that they doubted it. And nobody believed that that Jesus was risen from the dead. You may know the story about Thomas, who Jesus has already appeared and others have said, we have seen the Lord. And Thomas says, nope, not going to buy it until I get to physically see him and put my hands in the holes. There's no record that he ever did, but when he saw Jesus physically, then the switch flipped for him and he believed that Jesus had risen from the dead. But he started off as a skeptic. He didn't wish it was true. We live in a world that has all kinds of different interpretations on events and fake news. And I remember back when I was teaching education in Christian education, believe it or not, in a secular school as a what do they call it? I don't know, religious thing. Once a week I'd go in. I remember talking with the kids then, we're talking the 1970s here, how you can't always believe what you hear and what you see. Because even though what you're seeing may be true on camera, it's only part of the story. And I'd go to the chalkboard, not a whiteboard, and I would say, this is the whole scene. But if I take a picture of this piece of the scene and show you something, you think that little piece is the whole, and it isn't the whole. They couldn't get it. So you've got to be sure that you're doing everything you can to get all the facts. And that's true today, and we're going to come back to that when we get to the conclusion here. We've got to look at all of the facts, not the facts that we want to see. We have a way of, with a kind of the old psychological test of the Rorschach ink blots, where you look at these ink blots and you see what you want to see and you interpret it, and the shrink figures out what you're made of. I don't know. But people see various things when they look at those ink blots. And this is not a situation like that, although people think it is. This is not a situation where you take a look at the whole, but you're really only looking at the parts, so you're creating your own delusion about what things were true. We've got to overcome that problem with the people in our world. My Sikh friends know something about what they do when they go to the Gurdwara, and they have times together, and they're very, very warm and affiliated with one another. They don't have a risen Lord. And that's the fact that we must, I was going to use the word hammer, but I don't mean hammer. I mean enthusiastically explain to them how when you look at all of the facts, then you can see that there's only one possible interpretation of all the facts we have, and that Jesus is alive, that he did come back from the grave. You see, these 11 disciples that were left after Judas had abandoned them and taken his own life, they were bonded together. They had been bonded at the Last Supper. They stayed together. They didn't abandon one another and say, well, that was a slice, it's over now. They tried to stay together, and they got through this valley of misunderstanding about Jesus coming to life again and carried on the message. When the women came to the tomb, they were coming to embalm deceased Jesus. They didn't expect that Jesus would be risen. You can read this in the gospel records. Mary thought that somebody stole the body, and when Jesus came to him and said, spoke to her, she said this was the first person Jesus spoke to after the resurrection. They've taken my Lord, and I don't know where they've laid him. And he said to her, Mary, one word. And when she heard that one word, which was likely the affectionate way in which he had addressed her before, then and only then did she realize she had seen the Lord. She didn't expect to find Jesus alive. She was going to the tomb to share the grief and embalm the body if she could, but there wasn't anybody to roll the stone away, and it was all foggy for them. So they finally, when things set in on them, and it took over time, and it's very important to understand that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote this information not as news, not as breaking news. You see on the chyron on the bottom of the screen, breaking news, and they say, well, we still don't know all the facts here. No, this was written a generation or 2 generations after the fact, and they still remembered how much they had doubted, even though they had all, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, of course, were still very much followers of Jesus, so did believe in the resurrection. They had not forgotten their initial doubt. And it's important for us to understand that there's nothing wrong with starting from initial doubt. In fact, it gives the strength of the individuals not going on an endorphin high over some fake event. And we've seen fake events. Remember, there was a thing happening where people truly believed that Jesus was healing people to the point that he was replacing gold fillings in their mouth with new teeth. And they were reporting it. And then after a few episodes on TV, they got to put the thing, these facts haven't been confirmed, but what happened was they went to the dentist and they said, oh no, here's the dental records. They didn't restore them to whole teeth. They restored bad fillings to gold filling. That was it. Gold crowns, old technology and so on. And people believed it, and people were crowding to see it. But when the dust settled, it all went away, and nobody brags about that anymore, because obviously was wishful thinking. We are not dealing with this with these gospel writers. They've had time to marinate in this truth for a lifetime. They've had time to watch the church start to emerge and grow, and the ministry of the Apostle Paul and the Apostle Peter are dealt with mostly in the book of Acts. The others we don't know, just because Luke didn't write about them. He didn't have enough time to do the history. I don't know why, but we got enough to know that these disciples had resolute joy when they finally locked in on the fact that Jesus is risen. When you come to understand that Jesus rose from the dead, and you understand that it's up to you to decide what you'll do with him, then maybe, just maybe, you'll come to Jesus. Maybe there will be a fantastic sick revival in my town, but it won't happen unless people start to explain to Jesus the birth and the death and resurrection of Jesus are bookends on an incredibly true history story, not an evolution of people over a couple of 100 years, to develop a new perspective on what God is doing. I'm not one to doubt the sincerity of the Sikh gurus, the 10 of them, who in the 1400s, 1500s, and early into the 1600s developed their philosophy. And there's a lot in the Sikh philosophy that parallels the Judeo-Christian ethic. But I'm not going to doubt their sincerity, but I do doubt their veracity, because God had already spoken, and finally spoken in his Son. Well, they didn't waver. They did stay together. The doubt strengthens our understanding of the resurrection, because this wasn't a, whoo, look what we found kind of a moment. This was something that they came to rather slowly, an understanding about Jesus. When Matthew records, and this is my favorite recording of it, Matthew records in Matthew 28, and when we get to what we call the Great Commission, Matthew said they gathered, but some doubted. It wasn't just Thomas. There were 11 of them, and some doubted. Who were the other doubters? I don't know. Not all of them were believing that Jesus was alive, but when they saw him directly on the mountain in Galilee, after time had passed, and he gave them the Great Commission, that doubt was the foundation on which the message of the gospel was built and spread. So obviously, the doubt didn't remain. The doubt was taken over and completely eliminated at the time of Pentecost just a few days later. Thomas wanted to test the physical reality of Jesus. John records us that when they see him and he's walking on the water and he comes in, he eats fish. This isn't an apparition. This isn't a ghost. This is reality. It's historical and physical. They came up with it's recorded in the Gospels, they came up with the tomb's empty because somebody stole the body. Well, then go find the body and roll it out. Couldn't happen. So the disciples stole the body. They do with the dead body of Jesus. Would somebody, they're going to try and prove their religion to people by hiding the facts? I mean, it's such a ridiculous theory, but it was the only theory they could come up with. And even the disciples were just evolving into this whole understanding that, no, this is the reality. And it seeped into their soul over time. Sometimes it takes some time for people to come to a knowledge of the truth. This was a very deliberate slowness of them coming to belief. Bruce, in his book, says it's like horses with blinders. You have to put blinders on horses sometimes because they'll get spooked by what they see off to the side, and you got to keep them on their eyes straight ahead. And some people would say, well, the disciples, they wanted this to be true, so they invented it and made it true. No, they didn't. I mean, they were glad that it was true, but they didn't believe it to be true until it was demonstrated by the physical reality. And the apostles, when we read in the book of Acts, the message was always, this Jesus was raised from the dead. He was put to death, but he's not dead. He was alive, and he came alive, and then he ascended back into heaven. And this is absolutely essential to our gospel message. And we need to keep moving it forward. The historical facts really do matter for us, and they make a big difference to Christianity. We need these supernatural events and prove them to people. Not just spiritual ideas alone, not just a philosophy of morality and Jesus being a fine teacher and so on, but something that stands on historical facts, not on the shaking sands of people's ideas. The important thing is that we must remember that the resurrection is the foundation. Christ died for you, Paul says. Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures. He was buried and rose again on the third day. And our faith is dead. He goes on in the end of 1 Corinthians 15 to say, faith is meaningless if we don't have the resurrection truth. It's just another set of ideas up there with the next, famous speaker who's going to come along and be like, Andrew Carnegie back in the day. We got the right guy. The power of positive thinking. There are several of them from years ago, or nearly 100 years ago, and they had some good things to say. Not denying all of what they said had some reality to it. It did, but it isn't founded on facts of a resurrected Lord. That's the fact that we have. So what are we going to do? Well, I will say that it is very important for us to reteach the facts, to know the facts, to think through the facts. Back in the day, Josh McDowell did a good job, and some of this stuff, you can probably look it up online. I'm talking about the details. You need to think through the details of the various theories about, that he didn't actually die on the cross. See, Muslims, they believe that Jesus was a great prophet, but they don't believe he actually died on the cross, so obviously there couldn't be a resurrection if he didn't die. That's a handy way to get around the resurrection, isn't it? But that's traditional Muslim belief. And people write it off, but we need to get back to these historical facts. And I think that it's important for us with this doctrine and with many other major doctrines to embed them into our teaching and our preaching. When I say embed them, I mean as an aside. Whatever you're preaching or teaching on at a particular time, you can say things like, of course, you realize that we've come to understand that the scripture is absolutely 100% true. And since that, then yada, 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 and go on with the story. We can say, since we know that Jesus didn't stay in the grave, but that he rose again, then that gives us the foundation for our hope going forward, the foundation for renewed life in Christ, the possibility of yada, yada, yada. And go on with your thing. But you embed the truths as a because, a foundation moving forward. And, it's important for us to keep refreshing people's awareness. They need to hear things repeated over and over again before they'll remember them. And if somebody's a skeptic, you don't say, why are you a skeptic? You just gotta cross your fingers and hope. No, it's good that you're skeptical if in fact you're willing to look at the facts and delve down deep into it. And then we give them the scriptures. You go back to the beginning of this video. I put the scriptures on the screen. It's the first slide. You can go back and you can copy them and you can write them out and you can actually do a series of Bible studies if you want on what was happening there. That's a wonderful place to start with explaining the gospel, that we're dealing not with a religious philosophy, an idea, our idea versus the other guy's idea, but no, we're dealing with a faith that's based on the Word becoming flesh, that God, the pre-incarnate Word, coming and living a life, a human life, an ordinary human life from all external expectations, and yet without sin, and having rising again from the dead. And that's not just wishful thinking like some, Pixar movie where everything ends up beautifully. No, these are based on historical facts, and nobody ever refuted those facts. Even though there was high desire to stamp Christianity out in the first century, they never achieved it because it was based on facts that they couldn't refute. So what we're dealing with today is a world of the terms fake news and conspiracy theories. If you do a survey, about 10% of the population will believe anything to say that actually the moon is not real, it's made of cheese. Almost anybody will believe that, whatever, the Holocaust didn't happen. And 1 out of 10 people will believe that 11 never. The Twin Towers didn't actually get destroyed. There was some other thing. And people come up with these conspiracy theories that somewhere there's a hidden group of people who are putting this thing forward to us. Defies any understanding, because you can't get 12 people to agree what to put on the pizza for a party. So how could you possibly get thousands of people to come up with some conspiracy? And somebody now with artificial intelligence, you can put words in people's mouth on the screen and for the facts, people, drill down into the facts and don't just look at the little piece of the picture that somebody wants you to see, but look at the big picture. Politicians have gotten worse and worse at this. The one party stands for this, and the other party stands for that. And the one party says all the other guys are lying, and they're crazy, and they're nuts. And then my party is telling the truth, and the other party says the exact same thing. We've got such a divisiveness in our society. Many people, perhaps most, are throwing up their hands and saying, how do you know what to believe? Well, you can know what to believe if you drill down into the logic and historical facts and start back with the resurrection. We need to do that. We need to do that at Christmas time when people are talking about the baby in the manger and it's cute and beautiful. And, they always have these arty things that look kind of nice. It wasn't like that. There was nobody in Bethlehem really paid attention to what was going on that day. They were living right. And you can look this one up. Bethlehem is in the shadow of the Herodium, this on the top of a mountain, this massive temple, the ruins of which are still there. Temple Pat Castle wasn't what I'm trying to say. Big place that Herod had built, and it looked over this little town of Bethlehem, and we sing these songs in Silent Night and Holy Night. We felt that it was a silent night. It was a regular night. This aura that we built around the manger has some good things about it and has some not so good things about it. You've got these manger scenes on people's lawns where we've got the shepherds and the wise men there. The Bible will teach that the wise a nice pictorial illusion, but that's all a fantasy, and we need to drill down and make sure that we have people understand the facts. And no, Virginia, there is no Santa Claus. And we need to understand that Jesus did come, and he was born in a nondescript place. And only Luke tells us about the birth. Matthew doesn't tell us about the birth directly. It talks about the birth of Christ, but months later, perhaps a year later, and we'll get all kinds of things arising around us, and there will be more. That'll say, the government's trying to get us. They're going to take away all of our rights and everything else. And I see preachers, I get sick and tired of watching people trying to beat up on the politician they don't agree with and support the politician they do agree with. And they say, yeah, well, what about what the other guy did? Well, if the other guy did something bad, he did something bad. So that doesn't prove that your guy didn't do something bad. No, there are no pure politicians. Get over it. There are no pure preachers. Get over it. What you've got to do is build on the facts and stay focused on the facts. And when somebody says, do you think they're going to take away all our civil rights? Get over it. It's happened before. It may happen again. It's not likely that the current government is going to last. In democracies, it is likely that there will be another king arising in some other country, and that some of the countries that we find have such corruption built in them, they're going to stay corrupt until we get the facts of the gospel into the hearts of people and stay focused on the facts of the resurrection. That's an instruction for you. So go back and study those facts. Go study the absolute illogical idea that says it wasn't really true. They invented it. They wrote about it a generation later. Why would they even write about it if it had proven to not be true? Think, people. Think. And share your thoughts with others patiently, because some will start out skeptically and say, what would you do with this passage that says this about Mary and coming to embalm Jesus and believing that the body was stolen? She didn't think that the disciples stole it. The guard said the disciples stole it. The empty tomb is the answer. It is the foundation on which everything else springs. And make sure that you embed that into your discussion, in your thinking with people in any season of the year. All around, it's always in season to mention the empty tomb.